Back in late spring, I planted just 2 sweet potato plants at the end of this bed here in the center of the polycrub. This is my first year attempting to grow sweet potatoes. They love a really warm climate, which we don't have here, but inside this sheltered space, they had it. They had warmth, they had heat, they had protection from the wind. And as you can see, those 2 plants have expanded from their area down here at the end all the way this way. And essentially, they got underplanted in a way with the cucumbers and the aubergines and the other plants growing a little bit further on down. But now that we're in November, it is way past the time that they need to be able to produce. And I know that a lot of people do tend to harvest them in September and October, but while the leaves were still lush and green, I just let them get to it, just in case they needed a little bit of extra time to plump up. The leaves are now a bit worse for wear. There's lots of holes in them. Some of them are yellowing. And so today my first task is to dig up the sweet potatoes and see what we have. So exciting growing something new and understanding how a plant grows. Okay, so we have the 2 original plants that I put in here. There's one here, and you can see signs of sweet potatoes around. And then the second one is over here. And again, there's signs of sweet potatoes. There's also a really thick stem coming off of both of them. I've trimmed them back. Now, all of these other little pieces, they're just stems that have rooted into the potting mix of the compost and soil underneath. And I don't think there'll be much underneath those, but I just want to dig around and see what I could find. When a crop takes as long as sweet potatoes do, or purple sprouting broccoli, or pumpkins, or anything that has to be in the ground and growing for a long time, it can be really exciting seeing what you get, especially when it's under the ground. Now we're going to dig up these 2 sweet potato plants and have a little dig around and see if there's any extra ones, not sure. And then we have some other root veg that we can go and harvest as well. Now that it's past the midpoint of November, it's time to dig up New Zealand yams, so we'll have a look at one of those plants. But before we get there, we need to see what's here in the grounds. And the red sweet potatoes kind of poking up from the top seem promising, but I don't want to get my hopes up. You never really know with these things. The general advice with digging up sweet potatoes is that you don't want to damage the actual sweet potatoes. And so it's recommended to loosen up the soil with a fork. And I think I might have forked one right there. Great. And then use your hands. Okay, I think that's loose enough. It's as much as I want to dig around. Oh, wow. Oh my goodness. That's an actual sweet potato. Imagine that. Let's see how many more we have here. Oh my goodness, wow. Look at that. Oh my goodness, this is so exciting. I've never grown sweet potatoes, and as of 2022, I have. Let's set these aside. Do some digging around. Oh yes, there's more in here. It's astonishing to me that in an area that's about 3.5 feet by 3.5 feet, we got this many sweet potatoes. The first plant is all over here on the left, and there are some decent sized sweet potatoes in there, along with smaller spindly ones. These were more on the outside. And the plant itself, I'm gonna have to divide up. It's quite twisted, but there's some good sweet potatoes in there. The second plant has a massive round one at the base. That is a big sweet potato. And then lots of smaller and medium-sized ones, and then one big one coming off the side. And that one has a big split down the side. I'm not sure if that will store, but pretty good for 2 plants. And then the surprise was that some of the stems that had rooted, so they touched the soil and started growing roots, some of them have also produced sweet potatoes. These were all areas near the 2 main plants. So the further I got away from the plants, the less likely it was for me to find a sweet potato, and rather just roots like that. But it pays to have a look, and that'll be a good meal right there. 5.6 kilograms of sweet potatoes. Not in my wildest dreams did I think that we would get that much. I thought, honestly, that we would dig up those 2 plants and there would be a few that looked like this at most. And so I'm really, really pleased. And I'm already thinking about what I need to do next year to give them more space to grow so we can have even more sweet potatoes, because we do eat them. We enjoy having them in our meals, but it's just not really been a viable option in my climate to grow them. So I'm gonna have to put my thinking cap on and think about ways to grow them next year. And if you have any suggestions, let me know. Now, this is more than we can eat in one sitting. And also, you don't eat sweet potatoes fresh. You have to cure them. So for both eating and storage, you do need to take a step after harvesting them. And that is putting them in a place that's humid, but quite warm. And we're talking about 26 degrees Celsius, so about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And that will develop the sugars into starches inside and will also help these guys to toughen up. Now, you can see on this sweet potato that there is some damage on the skin. And I'm not sure if that's going to be a massive problem, but it might be. So I'm gonna have to keep an eye on these ones that have a little bit of damage. And right now the skins are just really tender. I mean, you can push away at them with your finger almost. And so curing them will toughen them up and make them a lot better for storage. And because it isn't that warm right now, even inside the Polycrub, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these sweet potatoes into this rubbish bag, clean rubbish bag, and then I'm going to put them in the crate that's back behind me, and I'm going to set these guys in our lounge. So we've got the wood fire in there, it's the warmest place in the house, and the bag should help keep the humidity in. Let's head over into the dining room because I have some seeds to show you. The tripod is set up there because I've been filming some tabletop videos for a soap making course that's coming out soon. But down here I have my first seed order of the season, and usually I tend to order seeds in the winter. A lot of us do, but I was on the ball and I got some of these at a really good discounted rate. And I got some plants too. I'll get to those in a second. But first the seeds. Aubergines, eggplant did really well in the Polycrub this year. So I'm going to try this new variety, which is quite a long one. And it's supposed to be able to climb a bit too. So Violet Nights. Tomatoes. I've got a few different varieties coming, but this one is a stuffer. So it's relatively hollow on the inside, and you can see there, you can stuff it with rice or whatever you'd like to cook it. Some cause lettuce, a couple of different types of carrots, and I will continue growing carrots in the veggie pod next year. It's just worked out really well. A couple of different types of squash, including this beautiful one, Musqué de Provence. And that looks like it's going to be a good eater, so good flavor on that one. And then Crown Prince. And then over here, some more Swiss chard, peppermint, so it has that really beautiful pink color. It tastes just like Swiss chard though. Some standard parsnips and leeks. This doesn't have a photo with it, but this is a type of Romanesco cauliflower. So you know those almost alien looking green cauliflowers, but this one is like a cheddar yellow. I've also got a couple of plants. Now here on the left, this is a lemon, and I will be growing it in a container, and it'll be fine outside in the summer. And then I'm thinking to overwinter it in the Polycrub in the future. And then on the right, this is a tayberry, and I've never even tasted them before, but everyone keeps recommending them to me. So I'm adding them to the berry patch part of the garden, and I'll be moving a lot of the plants, so the berry bushes and plants that I have at the allotment, home over the winter. And here in the middle, we have some onion sets, and these are a type that are suitable for planting right now. I have these autumn sets ready to go, and I'm going to plant them out in this bed. But first, I want to dig up the first of the New Zealand yams, oca. And these guys don't actually start producing tubers until after the autumn equinox. And then it takes around about 6 weeks for them to have decent size harvest, which is the middle of November. And if you can wait a little bit longer, sometimes the harvest will be better. But it's also important to dig them up before rodents get to them. And this is a problem that I've had many times at the allotment. I've just waited way too long. And then by the time I did dig up the oca, there were hardly any left. And so it's a balancing act of when are you going to get the best harvest versus are you going to have anything left after the wildlife have had their fill. So just even lifting up the foliage here, you can see that there are little tiny ocas forming at the base of the plant, so wherever the stems are touching the soil. So that is a good sign. I'll harvest all of those off in a second, but I think I'm going to dig this plant over here. From memory, I planted 5 plants in this area down here at the end of the bed, and over the year they grew lots and lots of this sorrel-like foliage. And you can eat those too, but it's the tubers that we grow them for. And this crop does really well in temperate places like Britain and the Pacific Northwest. I can see lots of little tubers. Let's start picking them off. That's a decent harvest, really good harvest. I'm pleased with that. Well, that's the first New Zealand yam plant that I've dug up, and there are a decent number of them, but a lot of them are relatively small. You can see all those little tiny ones in there, and ideally you want ones that are about that size. And so I'm going to leave the other plants to grow on for a good couple more weeks. There's more growing here, there's some tucked in over here, and also some of them growing over in the perennial bed. And I'll leave them to plump up just a little bit more. And you really don't have to dig New Zealand yams up until there's a hard frost. So they'll continue to grow and hopefully to plump up those tubers. Now you can grow onions from seed, and the few that I grew this past summer were from seed, but onion sets can be so much easier. And I've started putting some in already. They're about 1 foot apart, and I'm using this board as a guide. If you've not planted onion sets before, it's pointy end up because that's where the foliage, the leaves come out, and then the base end, that's where the roots start growing. And I'm getting them into the ground about 1 inch, covering them completely. I'm not leaving the little pointy end out because birds will pull them out or peck at them, and it can be very annoying. Now, I also should say that not all onion sets are suitable for autumn planting, but the type that you can order and get right now, seed suppliers will give you the types that you can get in. And this is a Japanese onion called senchu, and it's a gorgeous onion, good storer,
really good harvests, and it's just dead easy. And it requires so much less work to put in a set and then let them grow versus growing from seed. Both are very rewarding though. And seeing as we do eat a lot of onions, I am going to dedicate a good part of this bed to growing them this year.
Look who's just emerged from her entire afternoon nap on the bed. It's starting to get a bit dark, and Maggie is out in force. What are you doing? Silly bean. Oi. Off she goes.
One of the challenges with working outside this time of the year here is that the light levels dip pretty early, so it gets dark quickly, and the weather as well, just rainy, windy. And another challenge that we have here in the garden, which we only found out last year, is that there's a hill back behind the house, and when the sun starts sinking down lower as we're going into autumn, it gets completely hidden by the hill, so we don't get any direct sunlight from about now until mid-February. So it is a bit dark and gloomy. But no matter, you've got to carry on, especially if you love being outdoors. Now, I'm over here because I want to show you something that we're going to be working on over the coming winter and spring, and that has already been a work in progress. And it's been this bank just here below the Polycrub. Over the summer, it was completely covered with black plastic, and that was to suppress the weeds and the grass, to kill them off so that we could plant here. The idea is to create areas around the house that are filled with pollinator-friendly plants that are beautiful but also are going to support wildlife. We started this planting project this year with the bank that's just behind the Polycrub, and it was an explosion of color and pollinators and beauty. Now this area back behind me, this bank, this is going to be the second area. And what I'd like to do here is to support plants and flowers that are native to the Isle of Man, that are going to grow well here, that are going to be good food for our local pollinators. And so I'm quite excited to be working alongside the Manx Wildlife Trust, and they are putting together a seed mix that will eventually be available for people to buy here on the island. And next year is part of the trial runs of the seed mixes and seeing how they grow. And so this area back behind me is going to be seeded up with that seed mix amongst a few other plants that I'm going to plug in there. But first we have to get on top of the false oatgrass. Now, it was completely covered, this bank, with plastic all summer long, and it killed off most things. But false oatgrass is quite resilient, and so you can see all of the green starting to grow here. That is false oatgrass. And so I guess over the next couple of months, over the winter, we need to really clean that out and prepare this soil so that seed can be sown in spring.
Now coming down to the vegetable garden, we've moved, I should say rather, Josh moved a lot of the remaining quartz stones that we had in the back just along here, and I'm not quite sure if this is going to be their final use, but it gives them a use for now. And the veg patch, although it is November, there's still plenty growing. Lots of greens. Let me show you my celery, because these are doing really well. And I've not been taking entire plants out. I've just been coming out and grabbing a few stems at a time. There's some decent sized ones in here as well. Now I've got annual celery on one side of this bed, and then temporarily, perhaps, this perennial celery is going to live here. This is a plant that I got from my friend Liz Zorab when I visited her in August. And I'd never heard of a perennial celery before, and it's doing pretty well. So really interested to see how this grows and how we can use it in the kitchen. I've constructed a bit of a fleece tunnel, and this just keeps it a little bit more protected on the inside. And I have some chard in there that doesn't really need too much protection, but it does benefit from it. And also some lettuce. So the lettuce themselves, they won't be growing much over the winter, but come February, they'll really start benefiting from the protection in here and start growing. There are some greens and radishes in here, and I have the netting up to protect the purple sprouting broccoli. There are two just down here. They won't start producing until spring, but they'll be very much enjoyed around that time of the year. There are two beds that I want to draw your attention to here, right in front of me. This is, of course, where all of those beautiful dahlias were growing through the summer. And I had thought to leave them there. They will overwinter in the ground here. It is mild enough, but I decided against it. I lifted them. They are now holidaying under the house with protection, and then I'll plant them out again next year. And in their place, I've planted out some spring cabbage, which I need to get some netting up and over soon. But down here, you can see that we've started extending the vegetable garden. And this is a new no-dig bed. And all it entails is putting down cardboard. And we've got some here. It's been ripped around by some recent storms. And then a good layer of that partially composted horse manure on top. That's it. That's all we're going to do. And this is going to be the pumpkin patch next year. This is going to be absolutely covered in vines. And any grass or weeds that come up will stay on top of them. But this is pretty much the same way that I created all of the other beds up here in the veg patch. The only difference being that with these ones, they have wooden sides, which are totally optional. Although it was getting quite dark last night, I still managed to do a little bit of planting inside the Polycrub. So in that space where the sweet potatoes were growing, I've popped in some spring cabbage. There are a couple of the pak choi over there, which you can harvest as one plant, or you can just take leaves off of the sides. And I've also put the New Zealand yams in here with the spare onions, because they do really benefit from sitting out in the sunlight to develop their nice sweet flavor. Otherwise they can be a little bit acidic. So they'll be here for a few days. And then over here, the greens that I planted in the last video, the garden in October was it, they are all growing beautifully. It's been relatively warm in here, and greens like this will grow if it's 10 degrees Celsius or more. And so this will keep us in leafy greens through the winter.
It's all looking pretty good. I'm pleased with the progress of the veg patch, and there'll be even more to be pleased about next year. And one of the big projects is going to be creating more beds down in the lower part of the garden, and then of course moving what I can as far as plants and shrubs from the allotment garden, which I'm giving up early next year. Now, I've also not been producing a video as regularly these past few weeks, I guess, month. And that's because I'm working on a natural soap making video course. And so that's been taking up a lot of my time. But if you are interested in soap making, that's going to be out very soon. And I will share word of it on my newsletter. And if you've not subscribed yet to my bi-weekly newsletter, so it comes out every 2 weeks, There's a link down in the video description, and that's completely free, and that is basically all of the new content that I've released in the previous 2 weeks. So sign up there and you'll get word of when the soap making course is out. And then next week, I'm really pleased to take you to a local chili farm, and I've just met the owners, farmers, and makers behind it this year, and I talked to them about what it takes to start up a homestead business, producing chilies, producing their own chili sauces, and advice that they might have for us. So join me next week for that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you then. It's starting to rain here, so I think it's time to get inside and make myself a warm cuppa. Thanks for watching. Until next week.